So, all right. All right, since, okay, it is now 6:10, so we will go to 8 o'clock. No, I'm kidding. No, we will not go to 8 o'clock. Actually, we're going to be doing lessons 3 and 4 tonight. They really shouldn't take all that long, and we're doing them together for a reason, because we want to get into more of the Word the rest of the class. So this is the last of the first unit. In your little textbooks, or actually they're big textbooks, there is a Unit 1 practice exam. Okay, it is not a graded assignment. It is not, we don't, you just we're at the institute level now. If we ever go to the higher level college, that'll be a requirement, and then it would be look in front of me. But what you need to know is on the final, those questions, not all of them, will be on the final. So it behooves you to take the practice exam. At the end of your book, you'll see a practice exam. It says Unit 1. So I would do that. That way, when you go back to study for the thing, instead of having to read through the entire book, you can look at that. You can look at the unit exam. Now, you can turn that exam into me. I do have the answer key for that, and I can tell you what you got right, what you got wrong. Oh, there's there. Okay, well, don't do that first. Okay. Oh, I didn't know they put that in. I know it's in my book, not the teacher's book. Okay, so you have the answer key as well. All right. You took it today and got the answers. Okay, all right. Here's the deal, folks. Don't look at the answers before you try the homework first. Okay. All right. So you have that. So that's good for the final exam, but it'd be good to take. We had our homework turned in last week, a couple interesting ones. First of all, Susie goes to the head of the class. This is Susie's homework. Wait, not done yet. You do not have to do that much work to get credits. The simple answer was Mark wrote for Peter, and he was writing to the Roman Gentiles, and he was concerned about the person who was not a Jewish person. That was his main concern in writing the Gospels. You know what? It could have looked like Becky's. That is very satisfactory. Becky got all the 3 main things. So when you do the homework, you do not have to overthink this, okay? Now, if there's more than one line, typically there's more than, some of you only gave me one answer. There were 3 answers to that one, so make sure you answer all the questions to it. All right, and then if we were in class, I'd give bonus points for this one. This is Peg's. She said, the word immediately has mentioned a lot about the urgency of the gospel message. That was in the lesson as well. Not necessary, but a good bonus there. So I just wanted to give you credit on that. Last week we didn't have any homework. Tonight we have 2 homeworks. So, all right, but neither one is real hard, and we'll get to that later on in the evening. So, all right, where's Mr. Clicky? That's the next thing I got to find. Miss Becky. I think I left Mr. No, I think it's upstairs now. Oh, yes, I was trying to get online. Can you go get Mr. Clicky for me? I would greatly appreciate. Or, not you. No, not you. Susie, stop. You just fell off a ladder this weekend. No, you're not going up the steps, Susie. Okay. No. Joanne, can you go look in the sound booth? I don't know where the clicker is. Becky's going up there. It's only 2 places I've been. Okie dokie. So we will get on with lesson number 3 and 4. Tonight we're going to talk about the political climates, and we're going to talk about the religious climate surrounding these 3 Gospels when they were written. You found it? Yay. All right. Can you do me a favor? Can you click one forward and make sure it's working? Of course not. Huh? Yay. Clicky's working. Okay. Woo. All right. Coming here at 10 after 5 and still can't get everything working right before thing. All right. Thank you, Miss Becky. Everybody give Becky a round of applause. So, what? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, my wife's looking at me. Okay. So, tonight we're going to talk about the historical empires and their impact on Palestine. So the first empire we had is Babylon during this time. Near the end of, as you know, that country deals greatly with the end of they're the ones that conquer Judah and at that time. And they're an instrument of God's judgment on the southern kingdom. We find that in Chronicles. And we know that Daniel comes from, and Daniel is technically the last book of the Old Testament if you go chronologically. You know, Malachi, there's 400 years in between, but Daniel is a little further along. We talk about what they did and their influence on the Jewish faith. We also know what comes out of that. Then Persia conquers Babylon. Then you have the book of Esther and how things start coming into there. These 3 slides, if you're trying to write down feverishly, you don't need. These are just some background information. So the next one is Persia. They returned the Jews to Jerusalem. The Persian king decreed that the Jews were free to leave Babylon, return to their homeland. But they kind of came with their baggage that they had learned from all the years they were in Babylon and Persia. So that kind of helps shape what's going on. Also shaped how the new dynasties would run in Judah and Israel in their mindset. And who knows? Anybody know what the third empire dealing with the fall of Israel was? No, not Greece. Syria. Yeah, there you go. Assyria. This was God's vehicle of judgment on what? The northern kingdom. They're the ones that conquered the northern kingdom. And when they conquered the northern kingdom, what happened? They resettled Israel, but they let people come in with their own pagan gods and influences. And then what happened is they had people who resettled Israel had a bad time, so they sent people who actually knew about the God of the land and taught them things, but they still did their own thing along with fearing the Lord. So you had this little mix of things that was going on in the northern kingdom of Israel. The northern kingdom of Israel was very interesting because it was called, anybody know what it was called? It was called Israel for a long time, but then it became called something else. It was called in Jesus' day. Samaria, yes, that was the capital city. Once Israel was conquered and they resettled, the land is now known as Samaria, and they're known as the Samaritans. You know, in the New Testament, you have the Good Samaritans and all that. The Samaritans, they weren't really foreigners. They were what? Israel, right? Now, there could have been other people there, but, you know, the Samaritans they're all part of Israel because it was fragmented after the death of Solomon, right? Remember all that happening there. And and we find that story in 2 Kings 17:24-40 about how they resettled the land and all that. So we get here. So now we find out that Israel has been conquered by many lands, and what happens is during this time period, and they call it the intertestamental period, in between when the Old Testament was done versus when Matthew starts. It's about 460 some years, because Mark's not written until about between 58 and 65, and about 400 BC is when we start seeing the stopping of the contact of God talking to his people. So you have this quiet time. And during that time, they're looking for things. But and why is it quiet? Because, well, they've polluted God with what? A whole bunch of other things that are going on. So, so you remember the lands are divided. And we know in the New Testament that the Samaritans and the Jews don't what? They don't get along. They don't mix, even though they were originally all part of what? Israel, right? They were all one kingdom under David and Solomon, and then, well, things went haywire. And so they had, so you see a lot of infighting between them. Anybody know the most famous story? Woman at the well. The first person Jesus witnessed to is a woman at the well. Where does he first tell something about the gospel? In Samaria. Right? Because she goes, how are you, a Jew, talking to me, a Samaritan, and me, a woman, and me who's had 5 different husbands, and the one I have now is mine? Why? Because Jesus came for who? Everybody. But there was a disdain, because what's the woman say? Where should I worship? Right? The Jews say it's in Jerusalem, and our people say what? It's at this mountain, right? And which is the right place? And Jesus says, well, there's going to come a time when you're neither going to worship there or there, but you're going to worship Jesus wherever you are. And I'm the guy who's there. I'm the guy. And but you can see how it caused a disdain. It would be like, can you give a modern example today? I'll give you one. Take a Southern belle, meets a person from Boston. They don't quite get along right away, do they, right? There's this little disdain for one another because of what they're from. They're both Americans, right? But they have definitely a whole different view on what America is supposed to look like, sound like, and be like, don't they? This is what kind of was going on in the time. Jesus is coming to reconcile all people to God, but first of all, he has a tough time reconciling their own people to themselves. And this is who Mark is writing to. Remember, he's writing to Gentiles, and they're Roman Gentiles. They're looking in on this situation, right? And how the Jews treat. And you have Matthew. He's trying to convince all the Jews that Jesus is the gospel from what? The Old Testament. And then you have Luke trying to speak to the affluent people or the intellectual people who say, wow, these people are all messed up. And see how that comes into why they wrote the way they did. So it's very important there. Now, that's kind of the Jewish history up until Jesus' time. Now, what happens right before Jesus' time? Who comes in? The Romans, right? I mean, they're the ones that put Jesus to death eventually. They come in, and Syria, Babylon, and Persia have their times. Actually, during this time, Greece comes in as well, but then the Romans come in. Now the Romans are what? The dominating force. Yeah, we just talked about Samaritans versus Jews. And the first thing that comes in is there's a Greek influence. You know, you have Alexander the Great during this time period comes in and takes over Persia and all these type of things and brings in the Greek influence. It has been said that Western civilization owes its intellectual heritage to Greece. Its legal, administrative, and political things come from that. Greece is the first what? Democracy, right? At least that's what history books tell us. How we get a lot of our democratic things come from that. It was so important for Greece to survive because it was the only surviving democracy at one point in history that went through. Now, they don't have democracy like we had democracy. Actually, to be honest, their city-states were more democratic than we were because every vote counted for everything. Here, we live in a representative government. We get a lot of that from them. But there was something about the Greek culture that was interesting because the Greek language back then was very important. It was the language of money. If you had to know Greek in order to buy and sell, the Greeks were considered to be cultured and understand all that. People wanted to be like them. Like today, is America the largest country in the world? No, not even close. But people want American jeans. They want American music. They want American, even though American money is dollar is not the top currency, it still is what people judge by. They want us to come visit. No one sends more tourists around the world than America, right? And then you go places, you can find someone who speaks English. Now, here's the interesting. Do you hear them speaking English or American English? Because if you go to England, that's a big different English than what we speak. But what's the language of the world? It's not just English. It's really the American dialect of English. Now, that changes over time. It's been that way for about 100 years. We don't know what will happen in the future. People think that anybody want to take a guess who most experts think is going to be the next language of money? Manchurian. That's what people think will be the next language of money. Don't know if that'll happen or not. I'm 50. If it takes another 50 years, it's great. It's not my problem. So you'll see right now in schools, the top 3 languages taught in school. Anybody know what they are? Spanish, not English though. Spanish. What else? French. Huh? Should not yet. German, yeah. But Mandarin, that'll eventually be. That should be. Or if our schools are already progressive, they should be. They should grasp onto that. So that will be. You're seeing it come up, but it's still not. It's not offered every school that you go to yet. But the other 3, you can find those 3 at almost every public high school in the United States. Because for a long time, Europe was considered what? The key to the world, right? That's changing now, is it not? That's the French and the Germans and the what's the other one? French, Spanish is not as popular. Now, Spanish is still going to be there because there's a lot of Spanish-speaking countries. But Mandarin is quickly becoming a dominant language in the world. Yes? She has a friend that lived in Holland. In Holland, you had to take 5 languages. Now, in Holland, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because Holland's low on the pecking order in terms of countries. It's in the middle of all the Holland. You have France, you have Germany, you have all these things surrounding it. And so for Holland to survive, it's a necessity for them to learn all these languages because you don't know who you're going to have to buy and sell with. So that makes sense. Here in America, we're kind of like the Greece of the day. We don't care. We care, but we don't care. You know, we're still the Americans, right? Say what? What? I didn't hear you. We still think we're top dog. And the world once the internet hit and people can do all kinds of things, there is no such thing as the top dog. The world has become much smaller, and it gets smaller every day. So the Greeks, they had practice called, well, we just talked about that, Hellenism. Hellenism. This will be on the test. This is a huge influence of what the gospel, what Jesus was trying to combat in the time. Hellenism refers to Greek culture influence, and the Greeks were convinced their culture was superior to what? All others. Sound familiar? And no, our culture was the best, and they did everything possible to spread that culture. They even did it by force or by influencing other people groups. Now, the positive side, because so many people and nations came to share the same language or culture, became easier to spread ideas and the gospel. Anybody know the number one way to become a missionary and get through all the different red tape in the countries around the world? Teach English as a second language. That gets you to the door in all kinds of things. You go as a missionary, you can't get in. But if you go to a country that's anti-missionary, and they allow you to use whatever you want. Even in China, they allow them to use, and mission, what they do is they use the Bible to teach English. Now, the only problem is, like in China right now, they've decided to rewrite the Bible. I don't know if we did that in a class a few years ago. But, it's amazing, But that's, if you want to become a missionary, go to a country that's really hardened to the gospel. Come in and say, I will come to your country. I will teach you in a second language. And by the way, I'll pay for the right to do that because missionaries raise their own money. So they don't have to pay for that. They gobble that up like crazy. 50 years from now, it might be the opposite. It might be, hey, I could teach Mandarin as a second language. Who knows what it'll be. But, but right now, we still have that open door to get into a lot of closed countries. That's how some of our missionaries get into Muslim countries and places like that. I will teach you. I go to the government, hey, we'll teach you English, and we won't charge you a dime. Okay, I remember you get nothing for free, right? They just let in Jesus. They didn't know, even though they were trying to keep Jesus out. So that's and in Muslim countries, why can you say, how they use the Bible in the Muslim countries? Muslims believe in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They believe those are holy books. So, wow, what a neat way for a Christian to come into a Muslim nation and teach English as a second language using the Gospels. That's pretty powerful stuff. Isn't that neat? Now the rest of the New Testament, not so much. But you can use those 4 books. Those are some pretty powerful books. No. Well, they have a different version of our story of Abraham and Moses. Remember, they think that Abraham's a horrible person, that Ishmael should have had the birthright instead of Isaac. So they're not so keen on those stories. They wish the Israelites would have been killed in Egypt. They have a different version of history. So no, the Old Testament and the Muslim faith don't go real well together. They do know the Torah, but they don't respect it but the 4 Gospels do, because they believe Jesus was a good prophet. They don't believe he was the Son of God. But if you read the Gospels and you read them long enough and teach English long enough, hey, the Gospel can defend itself. Remember, we don't have to defend the Gospel. We just have to find a way to present it. So that's just none of that's on the test. But now on the negative side, Hellenism became a great enemy of Judaism. Why? Because it pushed Jews and others to embrace widely held ideas and beliefs at the expense of their distinct religious and cultural beliefs. Say, well, this is what our religion teaches, but this is what everybody else thinks. So we're going to go with everybody else thinks. Do we live in a Hellenistic society today? Oh, I don't think so. I know so. How many churches are compromising their values to fit into everything else? Well, yeah, we believe in this, but there's all these other great ideas, and the pressure from all these other great. These must be good ideas too, and they're probably God ordained because why? God. And then what do you start to do? You start making acceptance for things you shouldn't accept, tolerant for things you shouldn't be tolerant from. This week, I don't know if you know that Biden, before he fell off his bike, signed an order in protecting youth on the LGBTQ movement against laws like Florida's law like that. They want to indoctrinate people younger, and they want and anybody who comes against it could face charges. One day the church is going to lose it's either going to be a Hellenist and say, yeah, we'd like this, or people like me are going to shoot their mouth off, not shoot their mouth, just say the truth, but end up with a little number in front of them. Remember how Martin Luther King, he just spoke the truth, but they put him in jail for speaking the truth. So that is coming one day. So now the Greeks, now they end up being conquered by who? The Romans. Yes, the Romans. So the Romans, they have some interesting contributions. So they take over, and what do the Romans do? They absorb Greek society. The Romans actually used the Greek language to communicate, to spend money. It's amazing how they take a fallen foe and graft it into their system. Now, throughout its far-flung empire, Rome established peace that would last for centuries. It conquered lands, and it was peaceful for many, many centuries. Rome lasted almost three and a half centuries, but it wasn't always peaceful. They had a long period of that where the Romans were feared. Problem is, they became complacent and said, hey, we're number one no matter what. And then came a time they thought they were still number one, but they weren't. And but they had that, and so this is where the time is going on. Jerusalem has there's some squabbles going on in the land because they're a conquered people, but for the most part, the Romans have control of the situation. Next one, maybe. Rather than destroying Greek culture, I just did that. They incorporated much of what was good and continued to promote it. So Hellenism continued to be a force for many years. It still exists today to a certain extent. Now, it's not Greek influence on our culture, but it is to a certain extent. We get a lot of our culture from Greeks, and still from today, our government and things like that. The fact that we like culture, Greece, they kind of defined that. It's gone on. Greece also defined the aristocrat. The person that has the luxury and all that, I'm better than you. We hear the haves and the have-nots. That came from Greece, believe it or not. That's where that kind of all came from. And then we have some more contributions. Oh, you want to go back? Okay. Yeah. The second one here. All right. So basically the main point, the second one, is that they incorporated much of Greek culture into their system and going from there. Everybody good? All right. And then the third one, last one for this one here. Rome's legal and political system became a model that many nations would use for centuries. So Rome took a lot of different things and became a model. Back then, if you were in trouble, you had a right to appeal to Caesar. What would that equate to in our country? The Supreme Court. Now, does the Supreme Court hear every case? Absolutely not. But you have a right to take your case there, but they pick and choose. Like Paul, he appealed to Caesar. He never got to go before Caesar, but he what? Had the right to appeal to that. So it's not just, and why is that important? Because in their legal system, there could be corrupt people along the way, so you can always go to the top. Now, if everything is corrupt, oh, well, that's just the way it goes. But you always have a chance. How many things have gone through? You win a court case, and what the other side goes and says, I want to appeal that. Then an appeals court could overdo that. And then you have all these different things. And court cases sometimes go on for decades until you get a resolution on that. And so that's something that's come that yeah, it was a good thing. But just like the Romans, it got muddled up. It's muddled now in America, is it not? And many nations have used that for centuries. Actually, that's how. We have wars. When wars are over, they have what? They have court, don't they? Now, they're really kind of not real fair because, everybody on the panel is the victory nations and everybody on the defendant is what? The nation just got conquered. So it is heavily biased, but they even have rights of appeals and things like that as well. And it's very important to understand how that was because it created what? Created a sense that just because you think it's wrong, maybe it's not right. Maybe it's somebody who believes my way. That's kind of the system that we have today, isn't it? When the lawyers go to the thing, they go, "Oh, we pulled the right judge or the wrong judge." Well, wait a second. Isn't a judge supposed to be 100% unbiased? But they're human, right? And we know by appointments, right? Why was everybody? What was the big thing in our last president election? Packing the court, right? And we don't know if that'll happen or not. People are bringing it up again because of the Roe versus Wade decision that's going to be handed down in the next probably 30 to 60 days. We need to. What are you doing there? You're not following law. You're following people's what? Opinion of the law. They can change and change and change. And you have the concept of precedent that's determined in the Roman thing. You know, precedent's a great thing, but then again, the law should still be what? The law. That's happened to the Jewish faith, right? They changed everything, and Jesus came. No, it's simple. But you guys have all messed it up. So, and he's living under. So you have the Jewish people who have been conquered by so many nations. Now they're being influenced by Hellenism and by the Roman system, and they're taking that instead of having God's doctrine being the foundation. They're saying this is God's doctrine, but let's add this in. Let's pull this in. Let's throw this in, and all of a sudden you get a diluted view of God. All right, turn the page. So now it's interesting. During the intertestamental period, I don't have a slide for this though. You had you're gonna have a worksheet go home tonight about the Herods. So right before Jesus comes and after Jesus comes, you have a whole bunch of Herods. When you read the Bible, you'll hear the word Herod a lot. Herod didn't live for 400 years, folks. Okay. Some people say, see, the Bible's wrong because Herod's here, Herod's 150 years. No, there were many different Herods. It was the Herod dynasty. And so you're going to have a chance to look through and see which Herod was there and what his ideological thinking was. And you'll see why everybody was so messed up, because no Herod acted like any other Herod. But they were also figureheads too. They were not truly rulers because they were conquered, but they were there to appease the Jewish people, because everybody who conquered Palestine always had a problem in the Middle East. Even today, there's still a problem in the Middle East. They don't get along. And so they were trying to appease that rather than do that. Now, one of the Herods you're going to find out, he got a little full of himself. He outlawed sacrificing to the Sabbath. He outlawed circumcision, and he desecrated the temple. Oh, well, that's going to throw a wrench in things, right? And he had the Jews who revolted against their own people. Just forget the Maccabees and how they revolted. It was in your book. We're not going to go over all that tonight. You get a chance to review that this week on your own. So it was interesting to see all this political upheaval that's going on. So Jesus is coming into a political powder keg with a whole brand new idea. Cancel culture ain't new, folks. Jesus lived cancel culture. Every time he turned around, no, that can't be the right way. He ticked a lot of people off, and so much that they killed him, right? Little did they know that was exactly what he came to do. So we go on, so you can see how that happened, and then Israel was divided, lots of Herods, yeah, okay, into all kinds of different spots. You had different Herods who kind of led a different area. So you had some Herods who kind of overlapped other Herods. Who's in charge? You do think there was some rivalry going on at the same time? Well, my area is going to be the true Israel. No, my area is going to be, or I'm going to rule with an iron fist. And you notice they didn't control everything at any one point in time, because the Romans weren't stupid. And they didn't want to, because the United people is a hard people to defeat, right? So it allows certain people to have things like that. And so when you read through the Herods, this map is important to look at to kind of see where they were reigning at the time, to know what was going on. So now we're going to talk about something that's interesting. So we talked about kind of the politics. Now we're going to talk about Jewish cultural distinctions. We're going to talk about Galilee and Judah. Galilee would be where Israel, the 10 kingdoms were. The Samaritans. This is where Jesus is raised in Galilee, right, in Nazareth. That would be in the northern kingdom. And we're also going to talk about the differences of those who lived in Judah, like we talked about earlier. Difference between being a Southern Belle, meeting somebody from Boston. There's a very different mindset. Or someone on the East Coast and someone Los Angeles and New York are two very different places. Or in Pennsylvania. Rural Pennsylvania is a lot different than what? Philadelphia, right? How a person in Philadelphia views our life and how we view their life are totally what? Different. And it's important for us to understand that. So here we go. So let's go through Galilee. Galilee had fertile lands of fields, gardens, vineyards, and olive groves. The better land was up north. So you had all that up there. Another distinction of Galilee, they were blessed with lots of busy, densely populated towns. So people had things to do, and they also had they had a different culture around them. It was home to a sizable number of Gentiles, giving it an international flavor because they've been conquered and resettled by the Assyrians, and then the Greeks came in, then the Romans came in. So the Samaritans, why the Jews disdained them, it wasn't just because they weren't just Jewish. They had all these other people groups involved. It was a very eclectic culture. A lot of different things coming in. So you had a different flavor of the month type of thing. It'd be like going to New York and you have Chinatown and Koreatown and Little Italy and all those things together, and they were all living together. And then, the tendency of the people were more friendly, warm-hearted, and fervent than their counterparts in other areas. And they were that way because they kind of, over the years, they were forced to live with one another. Now, originally, when they first were forced to live with one another, there was a lot of animosity, but over hundreds of years, that kind of changed. And you see that today. Take New York City, for example. When the immigrants came over, Chinatown, Irish Place, Korea, all these places, they developed because that was the only place they felt safe. Now you go to New York, Chinatown welcomes anybody in. We want you to come experience it because they want what? Your what? Your money. It's amazing how over time, well, how can we get money from this person or that person? And now you see those areas of the town being what? Publicized as places you need to go see. Wasn't like that originally. Remember, this it's about 400 to 450 years of time have passed. According to the Jewish proverb, the place to go for riches. This is where your upper class people were. A lot of your big palaces, a lot of your big things, projects were done up there. Now we talk about Judea. Oh, that went fast. The first one, it was more dry. A lot of rocks and limestone. Not a lot of places to be fertile grounds. It wasn't the nicest of the ground. That's what was left. Judea. Remember, Judea covers Judah and the land of Benjamin. It's not. And you go to see the Holy Land. You go to see that part. It just seems arid and dry and not friendly. But you go to the northern part of Israel, it's a little bit different place. So this area was like that. It was inhabited by more pure Jews, fewer Gentiles in other areas, and they valued other cultures little. They were snobbish. It's our way or the highway. Judah, because they were still considered themselves the line of David and all this stuff, they had an attitude of superiority to people from other regions. They didn't get the picture. They were God's people to share God. No, we're God's people. We're special, even though we're conquered. But you come in, your culture means nothing. You don't mean anything. You gotta, that you had that going on. You get a lot. We go through the Gospels, when Jesus ministers in Galilee versus he ministers in Judah, you have a different tone of how he's accepted or how he's not accepted. In Judah, there's a tendency of the people to be proud, haughty, and reserved. That comes from that what? Snobbish thinking, doesn't it? Reserved also important because they weren't open to new ideas. Jesus Christ was it wasn't a new idea, it was the original idea, but it sounded new. It was the location of the temple, the focal point of Jewish religion, adding to the spiritual snobbery. I'm better than you. You don't have the temple. This is where you got to worship God. So when Jesus when Jesus witnesses to the first person, that Samaritan, and he says, those will neither worship here on this mountain or in Jerusalem, but those who worship must worship in spirit and truth. Boy, when that word got around, that really messed some people up, especially down in Judah. Don't think that when Jesus became famous, all these stories get passed around. Remember, we only know about 6 hours of Jesus' life, and that's about all we know in the Gospels, what happened here and there. He lived for 33 and a half years. He ministered for 3.5 years. These are just the main stuff that stuck out to people. These are the stories that people heard about and moved on. So when Jesus comes down to get to Jerusalem, he comes down into Judah to minister. You wonder why there's so much opposition already, because Well, stories like what happened to the woman at the well have been spread around, and it doesn't jive with what the religious leaders want down in the South. It was a place to go for wisdom. Okay, sure, whatever. Okay. Jesus, what Jesus say? Foolishness is man's. God makes man's wisdom look like foolishness. How many times does Jesus make them look foolish? And it's interesting because what did the Jewish leaders remember back then? The religious leaders were supposed to be the wise people. What did they walk around with? Anybody know? Yeah, the phylactery, the box on their head. What was in the box? Yeah, Bible verses. Yeah, we're so close to God. We got the Bible right here. Okay, what did those verses say? Oh, I don't know. I just cut them up, put them in there. They still do that to this day to show how intellectual wise they are, and they can't tell you what's in the box. And why do you need it in the box? God says what? He writes the law of God on their heart. And that's not a New Testament concept. That's an Old Testament concept. Yes? Yeah, they cut them up and put them in the box, yeah. It's like any project. You write, then they didn't have a lot of Bible, but they would scribble down what they were told to by whoever their instructor was, their rabbi was, and they would put them in the box and put them on their head. They still do it today. You go to Jerusalem, you'll see them walking. You'll see some of them walking around and take picture of people. I don't know if they have anything in the box. I don't even know if they are a Pharisee. Just, hey, come get a picture of me. Anybody wants to turn a buck, right? All right, so now we're going to talk about Jewish cultural distinctions. Now we got, forget the top part. It's brought to the main. 3 major forces were prominent during the time of Jesus. This is things we got to understand going forward. So now we talk, this kind of wrap up for the thing. This is an actual question from the test. And the answer is Hellenism. So the Greek influence, where you basically accept all the ideas and muddle them into one idea, and if everybody likes an idea, it must be true. That's basically what Hellenism is. It's also a superior thinking of man's wisdom over anything else. Nationalistic Judaism. That's an important thing because, now it's important to understand nationalistic Judaism. We're not talking about God's version of Judaism. We're talking about theirs, the fierce nationalism, that who we are. This is the way we say the Bible's supposed to. This is what the Torah is supposed to say. This is, and it was pride. That's what nationalistic Judaism is going to. Their prideful version of Judaism. And then the other major forces during the time of Jesus was Roman imperialism. How Rome wanted to be in control of everything, though they really didn't have control of a whole lot when it came to the Middle East. It always was a problem. But how they tried to do that and force their version of how the world should be. Those are the 3 major forces: Hellenism, nationalistic Judaism, and Roman imperialism. All right, all good? All right, now we're going to flip over to chapter 4. It's actually a short chapter, so we should be able to get done in the next, we started 10 minutes late. We got 20 minutes, so we should be able to get it done. I'm going to kind of try to go through it. Now, we're going to talk about, first of all, now we have the synagogue system during the time of Christ. This is important to understand. The synagogues was the Jewish version of what? Their church service, right? They would come together. It was very important. Now the synagogue back then provided for many things. It provided for, now today you have the church, right? We come and hear about God. But the synagogue was the key for education. That's where their people got educated, including the children. It's where they got their spiritual learning, where they got their social support. And the synagogue was the vehicle of making of merchandise, of business. If you wanted to do business with another person, you had to be a member of a synagogue. And then other synagogues had to make deals with other synagogues to do business with one another. The synagogue was everything. That's why when Jesus leaves, you hear in the Bible, people are really afraid to stand up for Jesus. Like in John chapter 9, when the boy is healed of being blind, and they ask his parents about this, they were very afraid because they didn't want to say Jesus did it, because they said anybody who believed in Jesus got kicked out of the synagogue, and they could have. You got kicked out of the synagogue, you couldn't buy, you couldn't sell. It was like a death sentence. You were destined to poverty, maybe even down to begging. If you were a beggar, you couldn't even be you couldn't even be treated by someone else. And then these synagogues that deal with other synagogues, they couldn't deal with you. It was a very tough thing. Now, interesting thing is they required a minimum number of men to form a synagogue. Anybody know what that number is? 10. There was no maximum. They can get as big, but they had to have a minimum of 10 men to have a synagogue. So very important to them was that there. And men kind of ruled everything. There was no equality. You know, God loves men and women the same. We all have responsibility, but they just, it was there. Okay, the men come do the business. Women, you go sit in the corner. You know, it just kind of, Jesus kind of came to set that free. I was talking to Fran this morning. She's probably watching online tonight. She was asking me, do you think there were women apostles? Yeah, there were. You know, the apostles were ordained by God to do something. In the upper room, it says 120 were there, men and women. And that's where the ministry of apostle began. There were women apostles. You look through you read through the New Testament, you see places where they're mentioned. Apostles what? Teach and do different things. You have Paul, he's an apostle. But he talks about Aquila and Priscilla and how they'll teach you in a better way. Now, we know Aquila then was equated up to what? Or Priscilla. Aquila was the guy. Priscilla was equated up to, had the role of apostle. Remember the Old Testament, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, except for speaking in tongues as your personal prayer language, all those gifts in the Old Testament. Apostles in the Old Testament would have been judges, would have been apostles. Their authority and range. One of the most famous judges was who? Deborah. Actually, there's a chapter she gets to do a whole song. I mean, there's a lot about she's, you know, so yes, that's possible. There's nothing to do with the synoptic gospel. It's just I got on a tangent for some strange reason. Don't know why. All right, so let's get back to, so tonight we're going to talk about the synagogues. Now we're going to talk about the 4 different types of Jewish person. There's the Pharisee, there's the Sadducee, the Essene, or the Essene, depending on how you pronounce it. And anybody know what the 4th one is? The Zealot. So we're going to talk about those 4 different people. And your homework tonight will be, you'll take a thing home. You're going to have 20 questions. You're going to say, was this person one of those 4 people? Can you determine what they were? So first up, we'll do a portrait of a Pharisee. So Pharisees were concerned with religious rather than political issues. They could care less what the government was doing. It was all about religious issues. They were middle class. They were usually tradesmen or businessmen. So they knew how to handle money. Pharisees are about what? The money. Hey, they're the ones that come, hey, does your teacher pay the temple taxes? Did this happen? You know, they were on that. They were also the ones who were most against the tax collectors. Jesus sitting with the tax collectors bothered them because they were businessmen. They didn't like taxes. They were primarily laymen. They weren't fully devoted to being a Pharisee. They had, you know, they were like lay pastors. Next up, they rejected Hellenism and defended Judaism. Now that was really good if they would have defended true Judaism, because then they would have recognized Christ. Oh, here I'll go back one. Some people, anybody? We'll go one more time here. Concerned with religious rather than political issues. They were middle class, usually tradesmen or businessmen. And they were primarily what? Laymen. All right, let me know if you're ready to move on, those taking notes. Yep, all right. All right, so I always fill the whole screen in here, and then you can write as I talk. Rejected Hellenism, defended Judaism. They were nationalist Judaism people. Now, if they actually would have read the Bible and understood the Old Testament, they would have recognized who Jesus was. But they were more concerned about what? Defending what they thought they believed against this Hellenism, this cultural takeover. And it could have actually been really good. Now, in one sense it is, because this is how Paul kind of comes to grips when Jesus comes and talks on the Damascus Road. And he spends 10 years in Asia Minor studying and learning about Jesus and learning and grasping the Old Testament. He's seeing how this all goes together and how to go against the culture of the time. Because Paul really is he goes to the place and he shakes things up, but the right way. Ministry was centered in the synagogues rather than the temple. And the synagogues was where the power was, right? So the Pharisees were power hungry, were they not? And they're the ones that bring the woman caught in adultery, right? They're look at us, hear us roar. You know, we want to get away from that. And they want to take away from the power of the temple. They want to take it somewhere else. All right. Yes. Oh yeah, they're big on that. And they would go to the temple and do things and that, but the importance of the temple wasn't as important to them as the synagogue was. That's a good question. I would think they did them in the temple because that would make a whole lot more sense. Because they followed Judaism, they were steep followers of it. All right, and I'll put everything up on this one so you can. Oh, there we go. They accepted oral tradition, written law, prophets, and writings. So basically, they accepted everything that came their way that they thought it dealt with the Torah. They were all for it. The problem is, you know, what they would do though is take all these other influences and say, "Oh, this must be what God's saying." Rather, God, what are you trying to say? You know, and the prophets would prophesy, right, in the Old Testament, and they say things, but then but the prophets, they always prophesy what God wanted to have happen, but they would take the prophetic writings and then kind of read into them as well, and that would make a tangent that prophet never intended to be. The prophets always diverged back to what God's main theme was. And then other writings, rabbinical writings, people who they held in high esteem, other Pharisees who wrote things. Oh, they're a Pharisee, one of us, it's got to be right. Oh, it doesn't quite agree with everything else? That's okay, we'll make it fit. That's why John says, "You brood of vipers, you white-walled." You guys don't understand. You're not who you say you are. You're something totally different. You're masquerading. They sought converts, and now here's the thing: they sought converts who would be their peasant class, for lack of a better term. They didn't want people to rise up in the ranks, but they wanted more people to convert towards their type of thing, so they have more disciples. They can go around and, okay, you're okay, I'm your rabbi here. You're going to go do this for me. You're going to go do this, and it's kind of like their secret service type of thing. And because they wanted to keep everybody in line, and they wanted to rule by fear. Example, you have the woman caught in adultery we talked about, right? Remember, the oldest to the youngest left, right? The young ones are still part of that same clan, but they were what? They weren't up in the higher ranks, but they were into that thing there. And they were popular with many Jews. Why were they popular? They were feared, but they were popular. Because they railed against Romans, they railed against the Hellenists. They were the ones who were most vocal. They were that. Our version of the Tea Party from years ago, and QAnon today would be that. And they were real popular with different things, with the sects of the people, because they were a conquered people. So they were trying to get back to where they wanted to have their own country and all that. Yes. Oh yeah, we know they stoned people. They stoned Stephen. Oh, trust me, they didn't just. Stephen was the first person they ever stoned. Okay, you know, yeah. They brought the woman. They were ready. They would have stoned her. They would have stoned her, but Jesus made a comment. I mean, they were ready to do that. Oh yeah, I think the Pharisees enjoyed a good stoning. Oh yeah. It was a man, like the woman adultery. Yeah, where's the guy? You know, it takes two to commit adultery, all that. But we're not going down that tangent tonight. But yeah, they did those things. Now they were businessmen too, so they would love to use the threat of stoning to what? Extort what? Money, of course, right? But in order to keep the power, once in a while, they probably stone somebody just to say, yep, we can still do this. And we know the proof of that is they took it to Stephen. Trust me, Stephen was not the first one they ever stoned. Because you know how I know that? Because if he was the first one they ever stoned, there'd been a whole lot of debate. Should we do this or not do this? They had to have done it before. Because the first time you do it, there's a lot of, should we? It'd be a lot more conversation about that, and if people would be nervous. We haven't done this in thousands of years. Why would that just would have happened? But it was all too natural to them to stone him. Meaning that they've participated in this before. All right, now we're off to the portrait of the enemy of the Pharisee was the Sadducee. They were opposite. So the Pharisees were concerned with religious issues. The Sadducee was concerned with what? The political issues more than the religious issues. I'll put them all up here. Okay. They were the Sadducees were the wealthy aristocratic class. The aristocratic class and the working class don't typically see eye to eye, do they? All right. The Pharisees was the working men. The Sadducees were the aristocratic class. They were full-time. They were the priestly class. They didn't have the regular job. They spent most of their time, sitting back and talking about, political things and how to stay in power, how to do these things. And they were the ones that hobnobbed with the Romans. I'll scratch your back, you scratch my back type of person. They were the compromising class. And so they could keep the life that they had. They embraced Hellenism. They loved everything that came in, even though they were the priestly class trying to hold to what God. Hey, that sounds good too. That sounds good. Yeah, it's all good. You see how they railed against the Pharisee, right? Everybody good with those four? We can move on. Head nods. Yes. We all good? All right, we'll continue along with the portrait of a Sadducee. And we'll put all these up. Their activities centered in the temple. There's another reason why the Pharisees centered in the synagogue. They didn't mix real well. They didn't play nice with each other. All right? And so they centered everything in the temple. Sadducees didn't particularly like the synagogue system. But they didn't have to worry about the synagogue system because they had their own little group and their aristocracy. They didn't care really about the common person. They didn't need to worry about that. They accepted only the written laws valid. That's probably the best part of the Sadducee. Yes? Okay, they accepted only the written laws valid. How did they accept Hellenism? That would a good example would be today. Someone says that they believe in the church, but we're going to make it fit with what's in the written law. They would just, keep peace. They were just a double-minded man in a stable all his way. They only accept the written law as far as how they would apply it to politics, but then they would take all these other ideas and say, this is how the written law changed and how it should be applied today. They would put their spin on it. Does that make sense? Today we have spin doctors, right? Every politician has their person put their spin. The Sadducees, that was their thing. They could spin. They could take the law and say, yeah, see, we're following the written law. Here's how you spin it. They were a closed hereditary group. They did not seek converts. It was the good old boys club, right? You had to have a certain nobility, a certain family line. Now, if you were a certain person, they could graft you in and make it that way because they wanted to have but you had to have a certain family lineage. You had to have a certain thing. If you were from a commoner, you weren't no chance to marry anybody in this group. Okay, you had to, unless something miraculous happened. But this is how it was. They were a very closed group. They didn't seek converts, but they wanted everybody to believe like them. Kind of wonder why they weren't real successful. You need to believe how we believe, but we don't want you to let you in. Kind of doesn't work real well. Another reason why the Pharisees were more popular. Because, they took anybody. If you were living, breathing, they'll take you into their synagogue, into their fold, because they had more people underneath them. It was the pyramid scheme, the Pharisee. And they were out of touch and unpopular. You don't need to worry about that one. I just add that in. All right. Oh, next one. They're out of touch and unpopular with most Jews. And there we go. All right. Now we're going to talk about the other subgroups. There are two other subgroups. And you don't need to take a lot of notes on these because both of these tie to one or the other. But they're the extremists. Okay. You have the Essenes. Okay. And you have the Zealots. And then you have the scribes. So we're going to talk about them tonight. So I'm going to move my page over. The Essenes were basically were the more fanatical version of, what do you think, group? The Pharisee, yes. That was very similar but much more extreme. While the Pharisees separated themselves from evil and remained within the framework of society, the Essenes separated from everything they thought was evil and anti their faith And they also separated from the framework of society as a whole. They were these hermits or monks or whatever you want to call them. And so they took their religious thing to a whole other level and became in their own spiritual bubble. Does that happen in Christianity today? Yeah, it does, doesn't it? You have people who believe in Jesus and all the things, but then you have to take it to another level. Well, we just can't associate with anybody else. We got to go into our own little bubble. The problem with that is you get in your own little bubble. You don't. First of all, you can't take Jesus to somebody if you never meet somebody who's not a convert. And second of all, when you stay in your own little bubble, actually your doctrine can change a lot quicker than you think, because you have nothing to try it against. Right? Oh, we're going to believe in this. Oh, we can change our doctrine just a little bit. Oh, we can say this is what Jesus really said. But then you don't get to try in the real world. Oh, see, that's not what Jesus meant. You're not open to other ideas because you become this closed to society. And what happens is you can also get so close-knit that you become so religious that you actually keep God out of your own society. It says here in my books here, Christians who have no contact with the world can do very little to change it for good. All right. Now it's also those also we have a balance though, because sometimes Christians can get too involved in the world and then what? Become like the Pharisee of that time, right? So you have that. The next group of people is the Zealots. The Zealots were people who they considered themselves patriots. They were being the nationalistic Judaism type people. They were the patriots. They're the ones who would do anything to bring God's kingdom down, and they also would honor God and their nation and believe in restoring anything to God using violence. They believed in using force. They believed in using any means necessary. Anything goes. They had a zeal for the gospel that went way beyond. This explains a few things. Anybody remember who was in the? There were two zealots in the apostles. Anybody name two of them? There was a second Simon. It says Simon the Zealot. There's another zealot in the apostles. Judas Iscariot was a zealot. That makes a lot more sense why Judas did what he did. Judas is like, okay, well, if I believe Jesus is the guy, well, I don't like what Jesus is doing. But God's not. If he's the Son of God, God's not going to let anything bad happen to us. I'm going to sell him out and force God to come down and restore Israel. Because, see, he wanted Israel restored. He didn't want the whole world restored. And Jesus said, I want to change everybody's heart. So that kind of messed with him. There was also somebody else in the Bible who was a zealot. Very famous person. And it explains her thinking. I gave you a hint. Her. Starts with an M. Mary, not Mary Magdalene, Jesus' mom was a zealot. After he's born, throughout the rest of his life, Mary's kind of confused. Jesus, hey, why are you doing this? Why are you talking this? You're crazy. Sends her children, his other brothers to talk to him and all this stuff. And she's kind of confused on what's going on because she's a zealot. So she thinks that God's going to come and restore Israel by force. But Jesus is talking about all this loving stuff. Love your enemies. Do good to those who persecute you. This is driving his mom bonkers because she was a zealot. Explains a lot of the interaction of Mary and Jesus. Because, every time Mary comes up in the stories, there seems to be a lot of discord. Mary, the mother, you should know who your son is. But she thinks he's kind of fallen off the wagon. This is not, the son are coming to restore. So she gets you're the Messiah. The zealots are waiting for the Messiah to restore Israel and Jerusalem and the temple to all its glory here on earth. They missed it. These are the people Jesus is dealing with. And then you have the third type of person, which were the scribes, right? And you had the scribes in the Old Testament acted as the secretaries or the clerks. They were usually involved in recording business transactions, keeping records, and acting as recorders of important documents. They'd also do what? They'd also be the ones whose main job was to what? Copy the the law and write these things down. Write down what people were saying. They write down what the rabbi said. They were more like the lawyers and teachers of the law. But when Jesus' times come, they've gotten to a higher standard. They weren't just a write this down person. They had gone up and they were the ones interpreting everything. They were professional students and interpreters of the law. They were highly respected on the matters of the law, and their word was final. So they gravitated to who? The Sadducee side. And they were the people who go to, okay, what does the law say here? What is your opinion? And because there are so many of them, just like there's so many lawyers today, everybody has their own opinions. So you go to the lawyer who defends you the best, right? Or will take your opinion the best. And that's what they would do. And they would go find the ones that would, if you know, who could do this here and who could do this here against Jesus and all that. And they would have them there. And they were the intellectuals, and they were the ones that caused Jesus a lot of issues talking about that. So, looking at different things. So, in the disciples, we talked about a few of them. We talked about Simon, who was a zealot. Paul was an apostle, but he was also from the clan of the Pharisee, right? John the Baptist was raised by his parents were Essenes. Now, he ends up separating himself, going on, but he doesn't become totally separated. Eventually, he draws people to him and baptizes and all that, but gives you a little sense of why John maybe drew out into the wilderness and why he did what he did where he was. And we have that going in. So you have different people involved. Matthew was a tax collector, so he might have more on the business side, the Pharisee type of thing. And Jesus had all these different groups of people in there because what he wanted to show them that y'all got something, but y'all don't got it, right? And so when he chose the people he chose is for a reason. To have all these different. You can say, okay, this is what this person was. So you do the homework tonight. You're gonna learn about all different apostles and see where they thought from, where the thought process, and why Jesus brought them together to say, hey, I'm for everybody. Let me take. And that's why the apostles they didn't call apostles until after the Holy Spirit came. So the disciples are learning, right? They're followers of Jesus. They have a lot of debates, don't they? You know why they're having debates? Because they all come from different theologically points of view. And it's not like, oh, come by, believe with us. So Jesus was open to, he said, you can have all your ideas, but let me bring it to what the main idea is. And also, so when they go out to the world, they're supposed to recognize that, hey, go minister to anybody. See, I brought you all together. You all have different ideas. Go out and show them the idea and use the fact that you learned this to do that. Now, they didn't quite get that right away, and then eventually they go out into the world because God forces them out by Nero and some other things. But that you see how Jesus had a plan. Obviously, he had a plan in these people. And then the last thing we're going to talk about tonight, we need to understand, is the ruling part of the faith, and that is, anybody know what the ruling party was called? The Sanhedrin. Very good. There were two levels of the Sanhedrin. The first level was the local level. Smaller councils composed of 7 members. In smaller towns, or 23 members in larger towns or cities. Now, the first question you're going to ask me, where did they come with those numbers? No idea. I don't see any of those numbers in the Old Testament. I don't know. It could have been tradition. Who knows? So 7 in the small town, 23 in the large towns or cities. These smaller or local councils were attached to synagogues throughout Palestine and exercised wide powers in civil and religious matters. So this is where this was their court system, for lack of a better term. And they were attached to synagogues. So the Sanhedrin, dealt more with the Pharisee, right? More on their side of things. But you had a matter of needed to decide whether you were a Pharisee, a Sadducee, whatever. This is their government system. This is their court system that came there. And this was their highest governing council that they had. Is everybody good with the local one? Nope. I'll give you a few more minutes there to write that down. We just have one more slide. And it's important to understand it's important to understand who was in charge, how they operated, because when we see Jesus tell some of his parables, some of his stories, when you understand the climate and how he talked, you understand why Mark says what he says to the people he's talking to. Or Matthew says what he says to the people he's talking to, and Luke the same way. Because they're God's inspiring them, but they're writing under the influence of what's happening around. All right. Everybody good to move on to the next slide? Okay. Mr. Clicky's not. Here we go. And then you had the Great Sanhedrin, which would be their supreme courts. It was located, of course, in Jerusalem. Where's our supreme located? Washington. That's where it is. This council centered on the temple. So the Great Sanhedrin leaned more towards who? The Sadducee or the aristocrats. Here's the interesting thing. The local courts were more centered around the local common man, but if you had to go to the Great Sanhedrin, it was with the what? The aristocracy, the elite. This group consisted of 71 men. Once again, I don't know where they get that number from. Predominantly Sadducees. So now you have interesting. The highest court in the land is predominantly Sadducees, but the lower courts are predominantly Pharisees. You wonder why the Jews were messed up. All right, you wonder why things got overturned all the time. You go up and down, depending on what court you went to. But there are also Pharisees and scribes as well in there, but they did not have a big vote. As you know, a good example of this, remember when Paul was brought before the Sanhedrin? And what's he, in order to, and everybody's attacking him. What's Paul say? Paul say, he sees some Pharisees in the group, and he knows that they're outnumbered. He says, but today I'm being judged on account of the resurrection of the dead. Well, the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead. The Pharisees did. And so then they start arguing, and Paul gets out of the situation because they all turn on each other. Paul was a pretty smart guy. Oh, you're gonna stop picking on me? I'm gonna claim the and then that was a big hot button subject. And the leader of the council was the high priest, who was a Sadducee, because there was more of them, which means he was also leader of all the local ones too. But they were all leaders were Pharisees. Do you see how there's this power grab going on? And no matter how religious they were, power corrupts what? Absolutely, doesn't it? Absolutely. Yeah, well, that's what they're striving for. And then you have it's no longer about they want the Messiah to come, but they both have different versions of it and how they're going to do this. And so you have this going on all around in that time period. So you could go to a local court, be judged, and then appeal to the higher court, but have a whole entire different point of view, couldn't you? Because of where it's going on. A lot of the time Jesus dealt with the smaller courts. Jesus only deals with the Sanhedrin, at the Great Sanhedrin at the end, right? Boy, that goes crazy, doesn't it? And same with Paul. Paul does a lot of local ones, but Paul doesn't have a lot of problems with the local Jewish councils because he's what? A Pharisee. It's only when he goes to Jerusalem that he has the bigger problem because it's run more by the Sadducee who hates the Pharisee and hates Jesus anyway because they claim resurrection dead they don't believe in. So Paul already has 2 strikes against him before he shows up to the Sanhedrin. But it's important for us to understand the concept and what was going on back there. All right. So tonight's class was just more lecture material. I know a lot to talk about, but you need to understand what was going on. So as you go home this week, the homework is one, you're going to learn about the Herods and how they ruled in different places, and the other one you're going to learn, and each Herod you can learn a life lesson from. Now here's the secret: when you read about the Herods, the life lesson is do the opposite of what he did. Okay? All right? When it says write down life lesson you learn from him, whatever that Herod did, none of them did the right thing. Okay? I'm just going to tell you that right now. None of them. They all were. There was not a good one in the bunch. Okay? So, I'm supposed to do like that? No. It's the opposite effect. And then I want you to look at, you're going to have, what is it? Let me see how many people there are here. Oh, here it is here. There's actually 33 types of people. You will then try to figure out if they were an Essene, a Pharisee, a Zealot, a Scribe, or a Sadducee. Now and on this note, here's a question you're going to ask me. What if some of them seem to be both? The answer is yes, some of them do lean to both. And next week we'll start the class going over that because it's important to identify who your audience is. What? Because we talk about the different things when Luke speaks and Matthew speaks and Mark speaks, they're writing to people with a certain bent in how they think. Okay, it's important to know, okay, Luke's writing in this passage, there's a bunch of Essenes and Sadducees in the crowd. Oh, well, we got to, how do we approach them? And so knowing your audience, and how passionate are they? We have to know our audience who we're speaking to. I spent the majority of my career in the inner city. Trust me, a lot of illustrations I can't use here because it doesn't apply to this area of the world. I've had to learn some new things because I don't know a whole lot about rural thinking, and I've had to learn some different things. But you got to, to your audience, because if you can't relate to your audience, you cannot get what? The message across. That's why it's important to know. And it's also important to understand the political times. What were the people doing? Why were they afraid? Why didn't they just come to Jesus when he was raised from the dead? Why were they afraid? Well, the synagogue's an important thing. Why the Romans thought, and different things like that. So any questions about it? I know tonight this is probably the driest of all the lessons. That's why I didn't want to do 2 weeks of it. I just wanted to plow through these two. I'm going to get into the word and now how this all applies going forward. Does that make sense? Any questions? All right. Well, dear Lord, thank you for tonight, Lord. Bless us and just have a great week, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Remember, Jesus loves you. I love you. And you are absolutely awesome. Just so you know, the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk about the man. We're going to talk about Jesus and how the different gospel writers present him to the people. So we're going to get into that now. And then the last section, we're going to do 5 lessons on instead of 4, and we're going to get into how Jesus portrayed his message. So it's going to be, now we get some really good, interesting stuff. All right? Everybody cool? All right, well, we'll see you next week. And the homework is up, and we'll go ahead and I'll take it back to you, and I'll just leave it somewhere. I'll put it right here, and you guys can, it's kind of in the middle of everybody. Take one of each, and you'll be good to go.